our Savior. He is worthy of our praise. He has redeemed our lives from the pit. And I know a lot of you are either going to be crying with tears or crying with pain at about 4:45 this afternoon. I have decided I am not going to let my praise be outdone by a sports team than for my God, my Savior, my Lord, Jesus Christ. Let's give him a praise. He's rescued us from the grave. He is worthy of it. Man, you guys had me excited. You had me tearing up. Man, I gotta preach. Thanks, team.
It's about time we bursted, man. I'm usually crying when you're talking.
Yeah. Team is so great. Thank you so much. Father, would you speak to us here in this place today? Break down the barriers. Hit us right between the eyes if you need to. Help us surrender to you. Surrender to your love, your faithfulness, your mercies that are new each morning. You are good. Help us to take up our cross and follow you. In Jesus' name. All God's people said, amen, amen. You can go ahead and take a seat. Welcome once again to Mission Community Church. So glad that you are here this morning. You all are the faithful ones. Braving the elements. I believe there is a special blessing for you today for coming out through this snow. Now, how many of you love when it snows? You love to get in your vehicles, your four-wheel drives, and get out there, tool around? Okay. How many of you are like, stay in, I've got bread and milk, I'm good? Okay. All right, well, special blessing for those who love to drive in the snow. If you're with us here today, we're in week 2 of a sermon series that we've entitled Death To Selfie, and discovering this question or going through this question of what does it look like to follow Jesus in this selfie-centered world? If you were with us last week, we talked about this idea that the more filtered our lives become, the less authentic we become. And that oftentimes if you're not familiar with social media, there's these things that we can do to put our best foot forward, to filter our images, to edit our images so that only what is the best of us is presented to the World Wide Web. And what often happens is when we put filters over our faces, those filters eventually cover our hearts. And what becomes just a superficial covering ends up turning into really a spiritual condition that we are longing for deeper relationship. We are longing for deeper connection. And we've brought this really on ourselves. And not that I'm a social media hater. No, I'll be one of the first ones to say social media is a great tool to spread the message of Jesus, spread hope, love, joy, and peace. But if we're not careful, social media can also hurt us quite significantly, as we'll even continue here today. And with social media, it's interesting how, as you look at it, what is hot one minute just becomes an afterthought the next. Like something is once hot, but now it's not. For instance, how many of you remember back in like 2012 when Coney hit the stage, or there was this invisible children movement out in Africa, and Coney, who was kind of taking all these children and turning them into military soldiers, and this hit the World Wide Web, and for weeks this was all that anybody talked about, but now we don't know much about it anymore. Or when those 200 Nigerian girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram. For weeks, this is all people talked about. It's hot one minute and then it's not. How many of you got suckered into the ice bucket challenge a few years back? Everybody's just dumping buckets of water and ice on their heads. And it was good. It brought awareness to Lou Gehrig's disease, and everybody was donating money to help research in this horrific disease. We have friends that lost parents to this disease, but it's hot one minute and then it's not. Social media, technology tends to have this effect that it accentuates something, and then before you know it, we've actually lost sight of it. Actually, it's interesting that the University of Michigan did a study a few years back. It studied 14,000 college students between 1979 and 2009. And what they were studying, what they were looking at is that there was actually a decline in empathy from one generation to the next. Specifically, today, we care 40% less now than people did back in the 1980s. Some of you are looking at that and even just, what? Like we care, we show empathy, we empathize, we have a lack of compassion, 40% less than people did back in the 1980s. Now, for followers of Jesus Christ, for his church, that is completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. And when they did this study, they asked questions like this. They said, kind of rating it on a scale 1 to 5. 1, not very much, 5, a lot. I try to understand friends better by looking at situations from their perspective. So we're not really interested in how people see it anymore. I often have tender, concerned feelings about people less fortunate than me. As time goes on, we get lower on that scale. I think of myself as being a soft-hearted, tender-hearted person. People are ranking themselves lower today. Other people's misfortunes don't bother me much. There's lots of reasons why this decline in empathy, this decline in compassion has happened over the last 30 and 40 years, but experts agree that one of the major factors in this decline is that compassion coincides with the rise of technology and social media. So as technology continues to drive us and social media continues to drive us, it actually results in a decline in compassion. Now, how does this play itself out with social media? I'm going to offer 3 suggestions. That the first one, that the social media causes an increased obsession with ourselves. That we're constantly looking at ourselves when we put ourselves out there on social media. So here we are, we're talking about death to selfie. Selfie, if you're not familiar with that term, it's when you take the camera, you turn it on yourself, you get that good angle, and you post it for all the world to see. There's all kinds of different selfies. Let me just show you a few of them here this morning. For instance, this is my very first social media selfie I ever took. I mean, look at that beautiful girl giving me a nice good kiss on the cheek. Or here's a selfie. I'm at the beach and you're not selfie. So I hope you get jealous. Or everybody needs one of these, driving in my car selfie. Like I always think about hey, you're driving in your car. Put the phone down. Or the duck face selfie. Everybody's taken the duck face selfie before. Or, ooh, look where I am selfie. My bride and I are seeing Hamilton up in New York, and you're not there. How jealous are you right now? Or here's the silly selfie. Everybody puts out the silly selfies once in a while. Here's another one some of you may appreciate. Yes, I actually own a suit selfie. A lot of you people are like, hey, do you actually own a suit, a coat and tie? And then when I do show up, they're like, oh, you actually dress up nice. I own a suit and tie selfie. What else do we? Oh, here's Carolina won the national championship selfie. One of my favorites. And then for the longest time, girls, you've owned this one. I'm taking it back. This is the look how good I am selfie. I am taking that back in Jesus' name. All kinds of different selfies. That took a lot out of me to give you that. Studies show that 80% of what we do on social media is directed specifically back to ourselves. So we look for the things that interest us. We put out those things that make us look good. 80% of what we do on social media is all about us. And it's interesting, it's fascinating as you actually get into the psychology and the physiology of what happens with social media. When we're in this type of a mindset, that social media, when we're feeding off of it and we're focusing on ourselves, it actually releases a chemical in your brain called dopamine. And dopamine is this neurotransmitter that actually causes addiction, very similar to those who suffer from alcoholism or any type of addiction, that we get this legal high, this natural high that as we focus on ourselves, it releases dopamine and we actually become addicted to ourselves. This is what social media is driving at. So the first thing that social media does, it causes an increased obsession with ourselves. The second thing that social media does is that it causes an increase in desensitization due to the overexposure of suffering. I remember this probably 20 years ago when I'd be watching TV and these television commercials would come on of these little kids in Africa. You know, bloated stomachs, extremely skinny, flies all around their eyes, malnutrition, and I would see these commercials, and I'd quickly grab the clicker and change the channel because it did not sit with me at all. To where today, it's just something that we see on a regular basis. It doesn't affect us much anymore. This overexposure of suffering actually causes us to be desensitized to the hurt and the struggles and the difficulties that a lot of people face in the world today. It's also been studied that when you look at social media feeds like your Facebook or your Instagram, there's this scrolling that we do, and a lot of it's based on timelines. And it's actually interesting that our brains, when it's in this type of a format, like a timeline, we can't differentiate what's more important than others. And so, for example, you'll see something on your time frame, greatest guacamole recipe, followed by NFL player beats his girlfriend, followed by some silly cat video, followed by another silly dog video, followed by somebody lost their life. And when we look at this on a time frame, our brain can't compartmentalize or differentiate the priorities of those different events. And it's not just social media that's doing this. I was actually over at my parents' last night for dinner, and we were having this conversation how the younger generation, particularly like my kids and under, they're completely desensitized to violence due to video games and movies. And so it's not just social media, it's that we are overexposed to all kinds of suffering, difficulties, violence that just make us desensitized. We have a lack of empathy. We care 40% less than the people did 30, 40 years ago. The third reason for this is perhaps this, that social media causes an increase in disconnection due to its lack of personal interaction. So for an example, if we see perhaps maybe a friend that lost their job or they're going through some sort of difficulty and they post that on social media, we see that and then we continue on in our scrolling. But if that same person were sitting at our dinner table across from one another and they're sharing that they've lost their job, they don't know how they're going to pay the mortgage, they don't know how they're going to put food on the table for their kids, when there's that personal interaction, well then there's something different that wells up inside of us to take action, something different that causes us to actually move to help solve that situation. Social media, although we're connected, it's that lack of personal interaction that actually causes a disconnection. Some suggestions of how social media is making us less compassionate than others. As we go through today's message, here's really the main point I want to get across, our focus, the theme for this morning, is that true compassion is a feeling that demands action. That compassion is a feeling that causes us to move, that causes us to take action, that compassion is really the ultimate expression of a selfless life. Here we are trying to die to ourselves, death to selfie. And as followers of Jesus Christ, we are called to do this each and every day of our lives, to take up our cross and to follow him. True compassion is a feeling that demands action. It's interesting as you look through the New Testament, there are many instances in which Jesus is moved to compassion. And so I did some study on this word this week. This word compassion that we have comes from the Greek word splachnizomai. Splachnizomai. I'm going to say that one more time because I worked all week on that word. Splachnizomai. Go ahead and try that with me. Splachnizomai. This word, it means to have the bowels yearn. I'm not quite sure what that means. But not to get too graphic, if you've had your bowels yearn before, you are taking action. Or you have a mess on your hands. It means to have the bowels yearn, to have a deep sympathy. Don't miss this part, to be moved to action. Everybody say this word with me. Splachnizomai. You're going to be saying that like champs by the end of the day. To say that we care and not take action is to not care at all. To say that we care and not take action is to not care at all. It's weird because with social media, we follow things on our Facebook feeds, our Instagram feeds, our Snapchats, and we see difficulties. And when we want to recognize those difficulties, we have to do that with either a thumbs up or a heart. Like, it's almost counterintuitive. Like, I don't want to like your hard situation right now, but I want you to know that I've seen it, acknowledge it. I don't want to put a little heart symbol around your difficult situation. It's this weird dichotomy that we live in with social media. But what we need to be careful with is that caring isn't clicking. Caring isn't liking a post. Caring is loving a person. Compassion is a feeling that demands action. We see this all through Jesus' ministry. That when he was moved with compassion, he actually does something about it. That Jesus shows us how this actually plays itself out. So I'll go through a couple of scriptures here just to set the context. That in Matthew chapter 14, the disciples and Jesus were out teaching and healing. And so Jesus comes to his disciples and say, hey, let's take a little weekend retreat. Let's get a little bit of a rest. And so they get into a sailboat. They take off across the shore. The crowds know where they're going to end up. And so when they land on the shore, it says in Matthew chapter 14, said, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. He was moved to action. In Matthew chapter 20, it says that they said to him, Lord, let our eyes be opened, these people who were blind. And so it says in verse 34, and Jesus in pity, it's actually the Greek word splachnizomai, so moved to compassion, touched their eyes, and immediately they recovered their sight and followed him. Mark chapter 1, a leper comes to Jesus, imploring him and kneeling, said to him, if you will, make my body clean. Verse 41, moved with pity, again, splachnizomai, moved with compassion, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will, be clean. And then in Mark chapter 6, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So what did Jesus do? He began to teach them things. Compassion is a feeling that demands action. To say that we care about something and not act is to not care at all. And the more we obsess over social media, over technology, the more we care about ourselves and the less we care about other people. But the more we obsess about Jesus, the more we care about other people, and the less we care about ourselves. Let me just offer some suggestions when it comes to us being compassionate, us being followers of Jesus, his church here in Chester County. That in order to die to selfie, in order to take up our cross, there are some things that we have to recognize when it comes to compassion. The first one would be this, is that compassion can be inconvenient. In fact, I would suggest that compassion is often inconvenient. That God wants to create divine interruptions to see if we might act. So if we turn to Luke chapter 10, there's a story of the Good Samaritan. If you're familiar with the story, there's this person who comes across a group of robbers who beat him and steal his possessions and just leave him on the side of the road to die. And there's several different people that pass by this person who has been beaten up, and it says the one person was a priest who passed by, and that priest, who is supposed to be a man of God, supposed to be a follower of Jesus, just goes to the other side of the street, continues walking, leaves that guy bloodied, battered, beat up, all on the side of the road. The next guy is a Levite, also a priestly person amongst the people of God, who too is supposed to take action when they see people in difficult situations. But same thing, he just continues along and leaves him beaten and battered on the side of the road. But then a Samaritan shows up. This person who is a Jew who was beaten up, the Samaritan comes by. These people were at odds with each other. I mean, we talk about racism today. This was a form of racism in those days, in which these people would take any opportunity to harm the other person, in fact, even kill the other person if they were able to. And so in Luke chapter 10, it says, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, as he had some destination to go, he had a plan. He was on his way. He had a purpose, came to where this guy was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Splachnies, oh my. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Now, we don't know why this Samaritan was journeying, but he was. He was going somewhere. He had a purpose in mind. Maybe he was going on a weekend getaway. Maybe he was on his way to work. We don't know, but the implication is that he had something to do. And this act of compassion was inconvenient, that God divinely interrupted this individual's plan to tend to this individual. We see this happen in Jesus' life all the time, when he shows compassion and he takes action. So in Mark chapter 6, again, the disciples are needing rest. Hey, let's go on a little weekend vacation to recover. And as they're in the middle of this retreat, this crowd shows up needing compassion, needing help. And so he meets their needs. In Luke chapter 8, Jesus is on his way to heal a 12-year-old girl who is dying. A father comes to him and begs for him to heal his daughter. And so Jesus starts making his way to where this dying young girl is. And on his way, it says that this other woman shows up who had been bleeding for 12 years, had spent all kinds of money with doctors and medical experts trying to heal this, figure this situation out. And so in this process, when Jesus is going to the 12-year-old girl, this woman shows up, touches his garment. He knows something happened, like the power just oozed off of him. And he stops what he's doing and heals this woman. In Mark chapter 2, Jesus, and this is probably one of my favorite ones, Jesus is packing, or is preaching to this packed out house full of people. There's religious leaders, Pharisees, all kinds of people that are just crammed into this house. And Jesus is talking with authority. And then all of a sudden, these four guys show up with their lame friend on a stretcher, trying to get to Jesus so that he might heal him. but they can't get into the house. There's so many people, and so they climb up onto the roof and they start digging through the roof. And as Jesus is there teaching and preaching, there's droppings coming down from the roof. Now, if that would happen here today, I would be calling security. I'd be saying, how dare you interrupt me as I worked hard on this message? But Jesus heals the man right in the middle of his preaching. Compassion can be inconvenient. But what if God wants to display his glory in these divine interruptions? What if God actually wants to move in and through us? See if we're willing to actually recognize and take action when we have so many other things on our minds. Compassion is an act of conviction, not just one of convenience. And as followers of Jesus, compassion is a lifestyle, not just a switch that we turn on and off when we want to. And so we have to realize that, yes, compassion can be inconvenient. I can remember a couple weeks ago when we had that first snow that they were talking about, oh, we're only going to get like an inch or something. And then it's the middle of the day, and 5-6 inches later, every road in Chester County is gridlocked. I'm sitting at the office, and one of our staff members calls me because she knows I have a truck, and she got stuck. It's like, Jason, I need you to come help me. And I'm sitting, I'm trying to preach peace to the people, prepare, and here you are, okay. And so I go and I start trying to pull her out, and she's stuck up on this hill, and right behind her is another woman. And this woman is terrified. And after 30 minutes of just trying to convince her to allow me to get in her car and back her up out of the way, it would have been solved. And so finally she does that. And again, this is like 2 hours into like my afternoon. It's Friday. I'm trying to get ready to preach. And here this woman, I finally get her out of there. She actually is a teacher at the school where my kids go to. And now I'm like known as this snow rescuer in East Ward Elementary School. Oh, I'm sorry, Euclid Hills Elementary School. And it's created opportunities to talk with people in the school when you would never think a pastor would have a voice in the public school system. Compassion can be inconvenient. Second idea is that compassion can be costly. We go back to this passage in Luke chapter 10 with the Good Samaritan. And so he's journeying. He's got somewhere he's got to be. He finds this guy on the side of the road. He starts to tend to his wounds, bandages him, and then it says in Luke chapter 10, verse 34, then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. And whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. You have to unpack this a little bit just to get the weight of what's happening here. So back in those days, a denarii was really a day's wage for someone. So here's this Good Samaritan paying 2 days' wages for this Jewish person who had gotten beaten and battered to stay in this inn. And then he says to the innkeeper, I'm going to be making my way back through the area. So whatever you need to do to tend to this person's needs, let me know and I'll pay you on the way back. In Chester County, the average income is $65,993. So if you take that out, take 2 weeks out for vacation, divide that number by 50 weeks, divide it by hours, blah, 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 blah. You would get 2 days' wages equaling about $528. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you gave someone $528 that you didn't even know and that you were supposed to hate? Compassion can be costly. And he goes on again to say that, hey, whatever you need to do to take care of this man, do it. And when I come back, I will repay you. The Good Samaritan opened his wallet to meet the needs of this beaten, battered Jew. I can remember, and I've shared this story before, when my wife and I were living in North Carolina, I'm sitting at a McDonald's and getting ready to order my food, and there was this older gentleman in front of me. You could tell that he was in difficult times, not very good health. You could tell he was just struggling. And he ordered something ridiculous, like small. I don't remember what it was, but I will never forget that it cost $1.87. $1.87. And I'm directly behind this gentleman, and he's looking through his pockets. He doesn't have enough to pay the $1.87. And I remember feeling inside this, my bowels beginning to yearn that, hey, just pay the $1.87. Now, you all think I'm this maybe a great pastor and wonderful. I let that guy walk on. Didn't pay for his food. And I can remember that moment, that day, that I've never forgotten $1.87. $1.87. Now, although I'm ashamed of that particular moment, anytime I am confronted with that type of a situation, I'm ready to pay for the person. Because of what happened back then. This is probably 8-10 years ago, $1.87. Colleen and I were in the Target a couple of months ago, and there was this woman who left her wallet out in the car and just had a pile full of stuff. I think it was like $33. And so instead of having her go out, hey, we'll pay for your bill. We'll don't worry about it. Be blessed. Go on along your way. Compassion can be costly. And here's why I share this. There are times when I purchase things for myself that I feel guilty. I have a little bit of a buyer's remorse. Has anybody else been there? But I can tell you this with complete honesty that I have never felt guilty trying to meet someone else's need. I've never felt guilty paying for someone else's bill, paying for someone else's groceries. I've never second-guessed that after doing it. Yes, I'm wrestling with it in the moment, but when it's all said and done, I've never felt guilty over that. What if God wants to do something miraculous through us by just stepping out and paying for somebody who's having a rough day, paying for their dinner? The person who's obviously having difficulties paying their bills, we just go ahead and do that for them. Compassion can be costly. But I also believe compassion changes lives. So yes, it can be inconvenient. Yes, it can be costly, but compassion changes lives. When you see this in the New Testament, when Jesus is healing, the blind are given sight, and it completely transforms their lives. That the deaf are able to hear, the sick were healed, the broken were restored, the lost were found, the thirsty, the hungry were given something to drink and to eat, and it transformed their lives. It changed them. This is what compassion does. And I would suggest that compassion doesn't just change the person who is receiving. Perhaps it changes us the most. When we are moved to compassion, it is the feeling that demands an action. I'm sitting at my kitchen table on Friday, and I'm working through this message and trying to just kind of put it all together and wrap it up. And I'm trying to think of, okay, how can I really drive this point home? And I'm sitting at my computer, and an email comes across my screen from one of our elders. And it's just a link. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, oh man, one of these spam emails. But I go ahead and click the link, not knowing that 2 minutes later, I'm sitting there crying at my computer as I'm wrapping up this message. There's this video that was posted a week ago by a girl named Amanda Reagan. She's a FedEx driver. And she's a follower of Jesus. She's a Christian. And every morning she just prays, God, use me. Use me. I don't know what you want to do with me today, but just use me. And so she's from South Carolina, and she posted this story on Facebook. Let's go ahead and watch just a little bit of it.
Hey everyone, as you can tell, I'm at work. I just had to pull over and share something real quick. As I'm delivering, I pull up to this house. The lady walks out because she's checking her mailbox for her newspaper. And I have 2 boxes for her, so we start walking up the driveway together. And she asked me if I had a happy holidays, and I was telling her how busy it was. I told her I had a really great Christmas and New Year's, and I asked her the same. I was like, how was your holidays? And with tears in her eyes, she said, it wasn't good. And she said, he's sick. My husband's sick. He has cancer. I continue to small talk to try to change the subject because that's awkward. And I deliver her package. She said, what's your name? I said, Amanda. She told me her name. I drove off. My heart's pounding. I do probably 20 more stops, and I have to go back. With this kind of job, we're on a tight schedule. Quicker you do it, the better. Quicker you get home. I stopped what I was doing. I went back to that neighborhood and rang her doorbell and asked her. She came down the stairs, and she had tears in her eyes. When she saw it was me, she smiled. And I said, ma'am, can I pray with you? And she just broke down. She came out on the front porch and squeezed me so tight. This lady I've never met. She held my hand so tight, and I prayed for her and her family and for her husband. And the point of this is a lot of people want the Lord to use them. And for me as an example, I pray every day for the Lord to use me. But when he's trying to use you, or when you feel that call and that tug on your heartstrings, do you move your feet? Do you move? Because I easily could have just went, I have 100 stops. I easily could have just went about the rest of my day thinking about it. So when you feel those tugs on your heartstrings and you feel like you need to do this, stop and do it. You know what I mean? Oh man. That was like the most genuine hug I've received in a long time. And I just want to share that with you guys. If you're praying for the Lord to help and to use you in people's situations, when he is giving you a chance, do it. If not, you're gonna continue to think about it and regret it. So be sure you know what you're praying for when you're praying.
You can ask our staff team, our key volunteers, as I'm sitting in the office throughout the week and I'm preparing messages, I'm constantly trying to take ideas and put them into memorable phrases for you all. And so sometimes I use alliteration to do that, preaching peace to the people, that it's alliteration, or I try to put contrasting statements together to make it memorable, and they're always making fun of me because I'm just on the whim trying to put these phrases together. And here I am, I'm trying to think of, okay, God, how can I really drive this message home? And I'm watching this video, and the point where I lost it is when she said, when you feel God tug on your heart, do you move your feet? I'm like, there is a young girl in South Carolina preaching to me right now. This video was uploaded a week ago, and there's over 16 million views. So here's this young girl. She is preaching to the masses. When you feel God's tug on your heart, do you move your feet? James says, don't be just hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. This is what compassion is. It's a feeling that demands action. It causes the bowels to yearn. It's a deep sympathy that causes us to move. And as followers of Jesus Christ in this selfie-centered world, we have to die to ourselves each and every day. It's not about us. It's not about how comfortable we can make our lives. It is about other people, because here is the truth, that you used to be that other person. That before you met Jesus, you were that other person that people were trying to be compassionate with, that were trying to share the message of hope and peace and forgiveness with. That when you are moved to compassion, does it cause you to move your feet? And the reason why we do this as followers of Jesus is because God was so moved with compassion. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. And he didn't come to this world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be set free, might have life, and life more abundantly. Compassion is a feeling that demands action. And in this selfie-centered world and following Jesus, we must die to ourselves each and every day. It's going to be inconvenient. It's going to be costly, but it's going to change people's lives for the glory of God. Let's stand together as we pray. Father, we are so thankful and praise you. We give you honor and glory for the compassion that you showed on us that caused you to move to send your Son to die on our behalf. So help us to follow after you, keeping our eyes focused on you, the author and perfecter of our faith. Would you help us to be the church here in Chester County, around the world, for your honor and for your fame? And all God's people said,